Charles Barkley made a lot of news earlier this week when he said he felt race was a factor in Auburn's hiring of Gene Chizik as head football coach. We welcome in TNT's Charles Barkley, our good friend, to the show. And Chuck, you said that race was the #1 factor in hiring Chizik over Turner Gill. You must have heard from a lot of people at Auburn since then. Have you reconsidered any of your thoughts, or have they been made stronger?
Well, I've heard from a lot of people, and a lot of people upset, but I still believe what I said. I want to sincerely apologize to Gene Chizik and his family. But, you know, first of all, there is a problem going on in this country about hiring black coaches. There is a travesty to only have 4 out of 120 black coaches in the NCAA football. That is a travesty. But that being said, if Turner Gill, who was the hottest young coach going out there this year, interviews for the job, and Mr. Chizik is on a 10-game losing streak, that raises questions for me and should raise questions for everybody involved in the selection process.
Charles, Gill said recently, maybe even yesterday, that he felt he had a fair opportunity at Auburn. You know Auburn. You've known Auburn through basketball searches, through football searches. This is not the first one, and you are close to a whole lot of people there. Do you feel the search process and the interview process was fair to Turner Gill?
You know, Mike, I played that question in my mind a lot, and I really do not know the answer. But I just have to believe there's no way he wasn't better qualified just looking at the resumes. If you just, like, from a common sense standpoint, his resume, everybody talks about him being the hottest coaching prospect out there. And Mr. Chizik, good luck to him, has lost 10 games in a row. He's 5-19. He has not won a road game in 2 years. That doesn't wash for me. That's not right, and that's not fair.
Auburn interviewed not just Turner Gill, but Rodney Garner for the job, 2 African-American coaches for that job. I'll give you a chance. That's so much better than most colleges that you must at least feel a little bit good that Auburn is doing better in terms of the interview process.
Well, first of all, Rodney Garner, who's a relative of mine, would have been a perfect choice. You know, he's an Auburn guy. He's been a great recruiter at LSU. He's been a great recruiter at Georgia, and he's been a great recruiter at Auburn. And I don't understand. I would have been happy with him. And just for the record, if they had hired the guy at TCU Patterson, Brady Hoke from Ball State, their resumes stack up better than Mr. Chizik. That would have been a totally different argument for me.
Charles, you and I have talked over the years about a big concern for African-American coaches being they don't get any good jobs. They get the worst schools year after year after year and never any of the big football programs. How do you see this changing?
Well, we got to keep having this discussion because some of these ADs and presidents are going to have the courage to talk to the good old boy network and say, hey, these guys, they're good enough to play. They're good enough to be offensive coordinators. They're good enough to be defensive coordinators. They're good enough to be head coaches. And that is one thing, you know, people talk about the lack of minority coaches in NCAA football, but that's one of my biggest pet peeves. The jobs they get, Ty Willingham, realistically, is the only black coach who's had a legitimate shot at a football school. The rest of them get these lousy programs where they might have 2 out of 5 good years, but they can't start like a dynasty and have a legit chance of actually playing for the national championship.
You know, Mike and I talk about this a lot, the so-called Rooney Rule, which we know works in baseball. We've seen it work in baseball, and we've seen it work in the NFL. And Mike doesn't think that the colleges are going to go to it. I think they will, just out of the doctrine of fairness, Charles, just because they're universities and they do it in their admissions. Why wouldn't they do it in their hires? Do you think that that's called for, that sort of Rooney Rule being put in college, and do you think it could be done?
Well, clearly they're not hiring any black coaches, Tony. So they've got to do something, whether it's the Rooney Rule or where players and other coaches. See, the coaches are in a unique situation because they can't really say anything. Because they say anything, they're going to come off as the angry black guy, and they're never going to get a job. Like, I think it's up to guys like you two and myself to say, We deserve more than 4 black coaches out of 120. That's not right. That's not fair.
Charles, have you talked to any other professional athletes who you think will go out and talk about this, particularly football players, guys that you have come to know in recent years? Because I agree with you about the pressure that has to be applied, and it can't be applied by active coaches.
Well, I've gotten so many positive phone calls. I tell you, I know my name is Mud in Alabama, because anytime you challenge the Good Old Boy Network, there are going to be repercussions. But I've gotten so many calls from prominent people around the country, players, coaches, and they've been so supportive of me. I can help. People say, you're taking a lot of heat. I'm like, I'm right. I'm right. I'm not taking any heat. But I tell you, the groundswell from very important and influential people in sports and in business has been fabulous for me.
Thank you for joining us, Charles.
Thank you, Charles. Appreciate it.
You can see more of Charles tomorrow night, the NBA on TNT. But next up on PTI, Stephon Marbury pays to watch the Knicks. By the way, that angry black man thing works for you. Why doesn't it work for anybody else?
Then maybe I need to go out and be angrier, because I get angry.
You're angry here all the time.
That's right. I can be angry
that is
elsewhere.
a working thing.
It travels. I can take it on the road. Trust me.